We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side.
ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And in a discussion about ESG, what I would consider the big thinkers, the political class, the Bidens of the world, the senior bureaucrats, the Trudeaus of the world, the World Economic Forum, have one point of view. And I don't think it would surprise you, Tom, to know that I have a decidedly different point of view. So let's delve into it. First of all, ESG is all lumped into one sort of discussion. From the point of view of the big thinkers, I suspect that ESG is a cover for socialism. I would describe the big thinkers' version of ESG as green on the outside and decidedly pink in the center, which is to say that ESG is, in many senses, a ruse for convincing people to allow more central government authority over their lives and the direction of society than they would willingly vote for.
As environmental, social, and governance ESG standards become more rigorous and widespread, many in the industry are asking whether they're doing more harm or good. ESG compliance requirements can be burdensome and expensive, and may impede mining companies' ability to operate in a cost-effective and profitable way. This has created a moral crisis for many companies, as they must balance the advantages of responsible mining with the potential harm that non-compliance can cause. Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to find answers to an increasingly frequent occurrence in the mining industry as Rick Rule throws more light on this topic. This video will explore the moral dilemmas that mining companies face when it comes to ESG compliance, as well as the impact it's having on the environment, communities, and workers. By the end of the video, you'll have a better idea of what the moral crisis facing mining companies is all about, as well as an understanding of the complex issues that ESG imposition can bring to the table. If you're interested in learning more about the ethical challenges that ESG compliance poses to mining companies, you'd want to watch till the end.
More central government authority over their lives and the direction of society than they would willingly vote for. But I think ESG, looked at objectively, is a good thing, simply because I define ESG differently than the big thinkers do. And let's go into some of those differences. E, the environment. I'm not going to get into, for the point of view of this discussion, global warming or whether it's man-made, whether it's not man-made. I'm just going to postulate, which I don't think any of your listeners could object to, that pumping more crap into the atmosphere and into the oceans is a bad thing. I don't think that there can be any discussion of that. And while I don't want to get into the carbon debate, to the extent that we can reduce carbon emissions, particularly large particulate carbon emissions, I think that's a very good thing. I don't have any particular truck with that as a bad thing. We'll get into the probability of meeting the 2050 carbon protocols later. But I think when you look at ESG, what you need to look at is, at least the E part of it, the impact of more and more people on Earth and the impact of people's desire for higher material standards of living. And you need to think about how you can use technology to allow more people to live better on an already crowded Earth. The first time that I looked at the overlay of the environment on resource activities is when I was in high school and then an undergrad at the University of British Columbia in the early part of the decade of the 70s. And I remember the first attempt at political correctness around the environment and extractive industries coming from a group that was called the Club of Rome, an ideological predecessor to the World Economic Forum. And the Club of Rome, populated by Paul Ehrlich and Jimmy Carter and all of these early stage morons, postulated that the world was hopelessly overcrowded. They postulated that by the year 2000, the 20 or 30 million people a year would be dying of starvation, that the price of oil would be over $200 a barrel, and the price of copper would be over $10 a pound. These big thinkers forgot, of course, that markets work, that the cure for high prices is high prices, and that the cure for the impact of high prices on human material advancement is technology. So while they postulated $200 oil, the markets work, and they got $18 oil. Kind of a miss. While they postulated $10 copper, they got 90-cent copper. And with regards to global starvation, they missed by the widest possible margin. We went from a circumstance where, when they identified the problem, as an example, the largest public health challenge in Malawi was starvation, to the point where the largest public health problem in Malawi now is obesity. I'm not saying that obesity is a good thing. I'm suggesting that obesity is a choice and starvation was never a choice. But I'm pointing it out simply to say that the big thinkers, the ideological predecessors to the World Economic Forum, were the Club of Rome. And they weren't merely wrong, Tom. They were laughably wrong. They said that all of the polar ice caps would be melted by 2008. While it's arguable that the Arctic ice cap is shrinking, the Antarctic ice cap, by any material standards of measurement, is increasing. I'm not denying global warming, by the way. I'm simply saying that the forecasts associated with this early group of big thinkers were so wrong that they had to reflect an ideology rather than science. Going further into the E problems around E, S, and G, if you assume, as I assume, that I don't have a right to restrict poor people from attempting to live the life that I live, which is resource and energy dense, if you accept that you don't have the right to tell other people whether or not they can have children. By the way, I'm not saying you have the obligation to subsidize them, but I don't think that you have a right to tell them that. If we are going to, as a species, continue to increase in number and also increase in affluence, we need to rely on technology to allow us to do that with the lowest possible impact and the lowest possible quality of life. It's worthy to note that as societies become more wealthy, that the willingness to pay for things like habitat and pollution control increases. So the first part of my postulate is that the best safeguard for the economy is to make people become as rich as possible. The truth is that if we went to totally organic, and we went away from fossil fuels-based fertilizer and the intelligent application of pesticides, that the amount of earth that we would have to dedicate to agricultural production and take out of natural habitat would probably double. And I mean, first of all, I think if we went to what the big thinkers regard as sustainable organic farming, that ironically, the postulations of the Club of Rome would come true, that we would have millions of people a year die of starvation. And for a third of humanity, that food would become unaffordable. I wouldn't want to live in a world like that, Tom. I wouldn't want to live in a world where the big thinkers' narrative consigned a third of humanity to perpetual starvation and perpetual poverty. I like a world where technology allows us to produce more food cheaply, utilizing less land. I'm fond of the Green Revolution. I'm fond of a set of technologies that takes the second most populous nation on earth, India, and converts it into a food exporter. My idea of environmental stewardship is a world that's wealthy enough and productive enough, a world where the extractive industry footprint is small enough relative to the land mass on Earth, where as much of a third of the land mass on Earth could be devoted to habitat. And that only happens in a very rich world. It only happens in a technology-dense world. It only happens in a world where you don't attempt to produce grain in Saudi Arabia, where it doesn't grow well, but you produce a lot of grain in Oklahoma, in the Platte, in the Ukraine, and you use every available technology, both to steward the productive capacity of the land, and also to ensure the material well-being of humankind. I believe too in regulatory arbitrage, which is to say that natural resources should be produced in societies with the highest standards of environmental care. I am opposed to the rampant and uncaring use of cyanide in gold extraction in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Nigeria, in Borneo. I would rather see gold produced in a way that there is no export of deleterious materials, which is to say that while I understand that artisanal mining is an important part of the economy in frontier and emerging markets, that some technological solutions and some regulatory solutions need to be put in place to safeguard future generations from the damage that is being done by rampant artisanal mining. More extraction needs to be done in smaller footprints, and there needs to be an elimination of the export of deleterious materials, be they dust, be they water pollution. And that only happens in an organized, rich way. It only happens with big companies like BHP and Rio Tinto and Exxon. The enemies of the big thinkers are the friends of the environment. So when I think about the E of ESG, I think it's a very good thing. But I think of it in a way that's literally the polar opposite of the way that it's presented.
The implementation of ESG standards has created a moral crisis for mining companies, as they must balance the need to comply with these regulations while also remaining profitable. This is an incredibly complex issue that cannot be easily solved and requires careful consideration of all stakeholders, from communities and workers to the environment. Ultimately, finding a sustainable solution involves striking a delicate balance between compliance and profitability. It is important to remember that mining companies are businesses that need to make money in order to survive. But this does not mean they should ignore their responsibilities towards society and the planet. To move forward on this pressing issue, we must stay informed, engage in meaningful dialogue, and support responsible practices within the industry. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope that it has been informative and thought-provoking. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And remember, by working together, we can create a more sustainable and responsible world.